Welcome to the Mac's Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit-chat.
Okay, welcome to the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at maxfuture.com, and this is episode 88, and it is September 9th, 2011. And we have a lot of Apple stuff to talk about, and so let's get to it. Remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast devoted to all things Apple, Apple news, Apple apps, Apple devices, and Apple-related stories. So let's get to it. Okay, so let's cover some of the news regarding Apple this week. It hasn't been as busy in terms of Apple news this week, but there is some interesting stuff. You know, one of the interesting things is MacRumors had a story out yesterday on Thursday, September 8th, which Apple really revealed, which is that under Tim Cook's leadership now, Apple is being more charitable. Now, there had been some stories out recently that Apple is not a very charitable company, and that not very charitable under Steve Jobs, that Apple doesn't give big corporate gifts and that sort of thing. So it's interesting that Apple has adopted a new policy where it's going to match charitable contributions by employees up to $10,000 per year. So I applaud this. I think this is great. And who knows, maybe Apple read about this non-charitable allegations regarding Apple and decided to be very charitable. So there's a quote in MacRumors.com's story of an internal email or letter, that company-wide email that went out by Tim Cook, the new CEO of Apple. And this is what he writes. He writes, "Team, I am very happy to announce that we are kicking off a matching gift program for charitable donations. We are all really inspired by the generosity of our coworkers who give back to the community, and this program is going to help that individual giving going even farther. Starting September 15, when you give money to a nonprofit 501c3 organization, Apple will match your gift dollar for dollar up to $10,000 annually. This program will be for full-time employees in the United States at first and will expand to other parts of the world over time. Thank you all for working so hard to make a difference, both here at Apple and in the lives of others. I'm incredibly proud to be part of this team. If you'd like more information on the program, you can get it on the HR web, which can be easily accessed through Apple Web Tim." So this is a nice gesture, and Apple has to be a good corporate citizen, and maybe this is a good way to start. Okay, another big story that came out this Friday, September 9th, is that Apple seems to be really doing well in its battle against Samsung in terms of patent fights and seeking to stop, not just patent fights, but trademark and trade dress violations. And Apple seems to be winning, or at least scoring major points in its battle to keep Samsung from making tablets and smartphones that rip off Apple's design. And the latest comes from FOSSpatents.blogspot.com, which is a great site that follows the patent battles that Apple has and that other people have. And the post is, Apple wins again in Germany, Galaxy Tab 10.1 injunction upheld. And what Mr. Mueller at FOSS Patents reports is that, this is what he says, that the court has once again upheld the preliminary injunction against the Galaxy Tab 10.1 based on the alleged infringement of a community design, a design-related intellectual property right registered with an EU agency that's held by Apple. And he goes on to say, at this stage, the injunction is valid only in Germany with respect to Samsung's Korean parent company. Only the German subsidiary is barred from selling across the border, but that doesn't have any practical consequences. So basically, Samsung cannot sell in Germany the Galaxy Tab, which I think is a big defeat for Samsung. And he has this analysis. He says, today's outcome means that Samsung has exhausted its options with the Düsseldorf Regional Court on the fast track, but here are Samsung's options, that Samsung may try to appeal this to a higher regional court in another fast track proceeding there. this could be a way to get the preliminary injunction lifted within a couple of months. Alternatively, Samsung could seek to just go forward before the current court and ask for a trial, which could take, I guess, like a year to win. So anyways, the question is, some people think what Apple's doing is wrong, suing Samsung. But my view is, look, Apple innovated the iPhone, Apple innovated the tablet, the iPad, and if somebody is copying it too closely and there's a legal claim to protect that device, Apple should pursue it. Apple has shareholders, Apple has property, and somebody shouldn't come in and just do a knockoff. Now the question is, what is a knockoff? And this is for experts and the courts to decide. I don't think consumers who don't know the law can decide what is a violation of the law. Take, for example, in New York, there are people making knockoff Gucci bags, knockoff Coach bags, and selling them on Canal Street, and they get raided and sued all the time, these people. Now, I'm not sure what else would do that. So the point is that Apple has a right to protect trademarks, trade dress, patents, all sorts of intellectual property, as long as it does it in a fair way. And look, we have to trust the courts to do it. Or a country of laws. If we had no trademarks, no trade dress, nothing, some people would like, wouldn't that be really unfair? What if somebody just completely copied the look and feel of Mac OS operating system and then, just down to every pixel? What if somebody copied exactly an iPhone and sold it and made it look like an iPhone? Where would you draw the line? And that's what the courts here are for. Where do you draw the line? So anyways, we'll have to see how this thing plays out. Now, FOSS Patents, this great patent website, had another story that really made a lot of news on September 2nd. And really what FOSS Patents was doing was covering Apple's lawsuit against HTC in something known as ITC, the International Trade Court. And that's another place that Apple's seeking to halt certain Android devices from coming in, alleging infringement. And what's very interesting, FOSS Patents dug up something in Apple's brief, and basically there's an allegation, and this is an allegation that Apple made against Android, against the HTC regarding the origins of certain technology that Android has. And basically the allegation is that Andy Rubin, who is the Google executive who oversees Android and who actually started Android before he went to Google, that he actually learned some of the technology when he was at Apple back in the early 90s. And here's what a quote from Apple's recent reply brief to the ITC staff. And this is what Apple says. Apple says, quote, Android and Mr. Rubin's relevant background does not start, as HTC would like the commission to believe, with his work at General Magic or Danger in the mid-1990s. In reality, as the evidence revealed at the hearing, Mr. Rubin began his career at Apple in the early 1990s and worked as a low-level engineer specifically reporting to the inventors of the 263 patent at the exact time their invention was being conceived and developed, ... It is thus no wonder that the infringing Android platform used the claimed subsystem approach of the 263 patent that allows for flexibility of design and enables the platform to, quote, to be highly customizable and expandable, end quote, as HTC touts, ... While Mr. Rubin's inspiration for the Android framework may not be directly relevant to the pending petitions for review, that HTC felt compelled to distort this history is illustrative of the liberties it takes in attacking the ALJ's initial determination and the substantial evidence supporting the ALJ's findings. So I guess the point, what makes this interesting is basically Apple and its lawsuit with HTC, which manufactures smartphones that have Android on it. What Apple is basically either arguing or suggesting is that Google's executive may have copied some of the technology that he learned when he was at Apple in the early 90s. And so this begs the question that some people have asked, is Apple at some point going to directly sue Google because Google's the one disseminating Android? And it's very interesting because it sounds like Andy Rubin, the executive, was deposed in this HTC Apple lawsuit, and Apple maybe got some, I don't know, evidence against Andy Rubin. So it'll be very interesting to see how these lawsuits play out. Obviously, Steve Jobs felt really, really betrayed by Google developing Android and giving it away for free, because remember, Eric Schmidt, who used to be Google's CEO, sat on Apple's board of directors. Apple had other common board of directors with Google, and Apple, up until the smartphone came out, was very close allies with Google. That, Apple and Google saw themselves as allies against the monopoly that Microsoft had in the PC area. And now, if anything, Apple is competing with Google, and frankly, I could see Apple allying with Microsoft, of all people, against Google. So it's interesting how the tables have turned. Well, things did get interesting in these patent battles between Apple and the Android device makers. A little later in the week, on September 8th, a story came out which pointed out that HTC then sued Apple based on 9 patents that it recently obtained from Google. In other words, Google got some patents from Motorola and then sold them or gave them away to HTC, its ally, and then HTC is using those 9 patents to sue Apple, I guess, as a countermeasure. So basically, these patent wars are getting very interesting and strategic. For some reason, Apple hasn't sued Google directly, but Google is supporting the defendants that Apple has sued. And now, it bought Motorola, and it's saying that it bought Motorola to get Motorola's patents to defend Android device makers. But it looks like even it had acquired some patents from Motorola because that deal hasn't closed, and is giving them to HTC. So this is now, getting really kind of crazy. So we'll have to see what's going to happen. Now, there was some confusion with the Apple online store in the last day because the online store was down briefly, and then it turns out that it was revised to basically show a revised, user interface for ordering iPads. But the other thing that was a little weird was that all of Apple's products at some point suddenly switched to having several days of delivery, which is a little weird, like every product. And this, people wondering what's going on, even things that were recently updated, like the MacBook Airs, suddenly, had, limited supplies. And, well, on this Friday, September 9th, it all seems to have been corrected. And there's a story in AppleInsider that says Apple revises estimated shipping times in its online store. It says a day after shipping times slipped for a number of Apple products, most notably the soon-to-be updated iPhone. The company has modified estimated shipping times to show items, quote, in stock rather than, end quote, rather than shipping within 24 hours. So that could have been just a technical glitch on updating Apple's App Store and nothing big. You shouldn't, I guess, take anything away from that. Okay, so now I want to talk about something I'm doing to my 2010 iMac. Now, I purchased my iMac last November, and it was the top-of-the-line 2010 iMac. Very powerful. It has a quad-core i7 processor running at 2.93 gigahertz. It's really powerful. It's running, I guess, almost 10,000 score on Geekbench, which is a benchmark regarding the power of your Macintosh. However, since I got my MacBook Air in July, my 11-inch MacBook Air, a 2011 model, I've been pining for a change. And why do I want a change? Well, my MacBook Air ruined everything, you see, because my MacBook Air has a solid-state drive in it. And this solid-state drive can read-write at speeds that are much, much faster than the read-write rate on the hard drive, the 1 terabyte hard drive that's on my 2010 27-inch iMac. And so I've been pining to upgrade my 2010 iMac or get a new iMac, a 2011 iMac, and order an SSD drive in it. So I went through the decision-making process of what to do. And the reason I needed to do this is this, because the MacBook Air with its SSD drive, and I've talked about this before, is just lightning fast. It's such a pleasure to use. You don't get sort of hung up windows of any applications when you open them. Nothing really hangs. And that's because everyday applications run zippier, booting, starting, shutting down, when it's working off an SSD drive, because the processor, even though it's only half the power of the processor on my iMac, is pretty powerful. And what's slowing down, let's say, my iMac is that it has to read-write from the hard drive. And the read-write speeds on my MacBook Air are 230, 240 megabytes per second. So I've talked about this before. So I decided, hey, I'm going to upgrade my iMac one way or another, either buy a new one, and you can get an SSD drive when you order it from Apple. But when I ordered my 2010 last year, I got a refurbished model, and I got a really good deal on it. And the refurbished model did not come with an SSD. Apple offers as an upgrade a 256 gigabyte SSD for $500 or $600. And I got a really good deal on my 27-inch iMac with just 1 terabyte regular hard drive. But now I realize I can't live on my iMac without an SSD drive, because the experience is so superior on my MacBook Air that it's kind of sad when you go to a computer that does not have an SSD drive. So I thought I would sell my 27-inch iMac on Craigslist and take a little bit of a loss. It's 1 year old, and I originally purchased the refurbished top-of-the-line iMac last year for about $1,867 plus tax. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to sell it locally for $1,400. And I got a lot of interest. Most people were trying to severely underbid me on Craigslist. And I've had a really bad experience on Craigslist. One guy tried to scam me, was willing to pay the full amount, but then said I should ship it. I should ship the iMac, and was willing to put in another $126 for me to ship it. When I asked where to ship it, the person led me to believe that I'd ship it to Oregon, and that he was buying it for a friend. And then when he made the payment to my PayPal account, he indicated that he wanted me to ship it to Nigeria. Well, alarm bells went off for me, because Nigeria is an infamous place for online fraud. There's all sorts of scams, and I thought, hey, there would be a scam here that I would ship it to Nigeria, and then they would say it didn't arrive, and I wouldn't get my money out of PayPal, because PayPal doesn't release any payment to you unless it can confirm that you shipped and delivered a product. So, and then somebody else offered me $50 less than $1,400, and we were all set to do the deal, and I was going to give him the computer, he was going to give me the money, and at the last minute, he sort of said, nope, he found another computer, a Mac, and that he wasn't going to buy it. So I decided I'm not going to go the route of buying a new 2011 iMac. And also, the other thing is the 2011 iMac is due for an upgrade pretty soon. And there's all sorts of rumors that Apple's going to really revamp the next version of the iMac. So then I thought, maybe it's not such a bad thing if I don't buy a new iMac now, because I have a pretty good iMac in the 2010 one. In terms of just screen, it has the same screen as the 2011 iMac, and it has a very powerful processor. It has a 2.93 gigahertz iCore quad-core processor, and yes, I could get a more powerful processor from the 2011 model, but how much more powerful do you need with processor? Really, the issue is SSD speed. Now, there are some advantages to 2011 iMac. One big advantage is that it has the Thunderbolt connection, which the 2010 iMac does not. The 2011 Thunderbolt connection is going to have blazing fast speeds, up to 10 gigabit per second speed, which is twice the theoretical speed that USB 3.0 has, and 10 times faster than FireWire 800. And right now the 2010 iMac has the fastest port is a FireWire 800 port, which is really 1/10 the theoretical speed of Thunderbolt. Now the thing is, there aren't a lot of Thunderbolt products, so if I did get the 2011 iMac, really there's not a lot of cheap external hard drives that run Thunderbolt. So that in the future, I will have Thunderbolt in something like an iMac. My MacBook Air has a Thunderbolt connection. The other advantage of the 2011 iMac compared to the 2010 iMac is that the internal eSATA connection for drives, and that's essentially the connection that you have to an internal hard drive or an internal solid-state drive, is a newer technology in the 2011 iMac, and it has 6 gigabit data connection, which means it has double the data speed of the 3G connection in the 2010 iMac and the 2010 Macs. Now, what does that mean? That means the maximum data rate of the newer technology is like 500 megabytes per second, while the older one is 250 or so megabytes per second. Now, as a practical matter, getting the 2010 iMac from Apple and ordering an SSD from Apple doesn't really take advantage of that faster eSATA connection, because Apple installs SSD drives that only run on the older eSATA data rate connection. So Apple's SSD drives that come with the 2011 iMac run at like 250 megabytes per second. And that's the case with my MacBook Air. I have a MacBook Air that's a 2011 MacBook Air, and it has a 6 gigabit data connection. We can take a look at it. Let's see. If we look at its system report, here we go. If we go to eSATA, if you look at it, it says that the Intel chipset is the Intel 6 series chipset, and the link speed is 6 gigabit, but the negotiated link speed is 3 gigabit. And that's because Apple put in an SSD drive that runs at the slower 3 gigabit speed. But if you got the 2011 one, you have the potential to get a faster gigabit SSD drive. And why would you want that? Because the faster you have this read-write speed, the zippier everyday functions on the Mac are going to feel. So that's why I wanted the 2011 iMac. But in the end, if I couldn't get a good price in selling my 2010 iMac, there's other options. So the option that I went for is I decided to upgrade my iMac to add in a SSD drive and to also add in another external port. And they have a turnkey solution that adds in an eSATA external port. Now, some of the Windows computers have eSATA connections, and eSATA connections are faster than FireWire 800. And this is a 3G data port because the 2010 iMac doesn't have 6G. So that means I could have an external drive that read-writes at 250 megabits per second. So I went for this solution, and it's going to cost me altogether $600 or so. And so what I did was I added an external serial ATA 3G port, and I decided not to upgrade my existing hard drive. And I then added a 115 gigabyte OWC Mercury Extreme Pro SSD. Now I could have just put in a 60 gigabit one that's $60 cheaper, but for $60 more, why not add that? And I got an external AppleCare extension of 3 years. So altogether I'm adding another 2 years to my AppleCare. And this is basically OWC provides AppleCare for $169, which is pretty much what Apple provides for AppleCare. Now, one clarification, I say AppleCare. This is OWC's own insurance if something goes wrong with your computer. And they'll essentially step into the shoes of Apple's AppleCare and fix your computer if you buy this coverage, which extends your warranty for another 2 years. And the reason they do that is because they're putting in hardware in your computer. So they're agreeing to take responsibility for your entire computer, even the stuff that they didn't put in, but that Apple put in. So altogether, that's costing me about $600. And I mean, the one annoying thing is it's time consuming. It takes a couple of days for them to acknowledge your order. They then ship you they send a UPS truck to come pick it up. Then it takes a couple of days for it to get there. Then it takes a couple of days for them to get it, to put the hardware in there, and then a couple more days to get it back. So today's the 9th. They're going to come with the truck on Monday the 12th, and I'll be lucky if I get it back in like eight or 9 days. So I'll be without my iMac for about 8 or 9 days. But hey, that's the price you pay to have something faster and zippier. Now, good news if you're into getting the Thunderbolt 27-inch Thunderbolt displays from Apple. News came out this week, and I guess PC Mag reported it, that Apple is shipping its first 27-inch Thunderbolt displays for retail. Now, Apple had announced this new display in July, and what's new about it, it's the big 27-inch display, very similar to the display that you have in the iMac. But the difference is it has Thunderbolt in it, so it can work with the new Thunderbolt devices, like the MacBook Air can connect to it. So let's say you do get an 11-inch MacBook Air. If you buy this $1,000 display, this can be your big computer when you're back at home, because the MacBook Air will plug into it, and you can use the ports that are in the back of the Thunderbolt display to sort of expand your Mac. So in the back, it has a second Thunderbolt port for daisy chaining. It has 3 USB 2.0 ports, a FireWire 800 port, and a gigabit Ethernet port, as well as a built-in FaceTime HD video camera and 2.1-inch speakers. So this is a pretty cool monitor, and frankly, to me, this was another option. I could sell my iMac and then make my MacBook Air my permanent mobile computer, but also my home video editing computer. I could hook it up to the display, the Thunderbolt display, and then put theoretically fast Thunderbolt drives in the back, and so then when I plug in, boom, that's where all my data is. So it would be nice if Apple develops technology that made it so that as soon as you plug in your MacBook Air to this display that has drives connected to it, that the the drives seamlessly connect. And I guess to some extent they do, because if you do plug it in, the drives are going to appear. And I guess it would be nice if you could just quickly unplug it without having to eject the drives. I wonder if there'll be any errors if you just unplug the Thunderbolt. But I think this is going to be a nice solution for a lot of people. The more Thunderbolt becomes available. Now, I wonder if other manufacturers will make cheaper displays that use the Thunderbolt cable. I could see, for example, if LG or somebody made a 27-inch monitor for $500 that had a Thunderbolt cable. That would really undercut Apple's sales, because that's a pretty steep price, $1,000. Now, another story that caught my eye in terms of Apple products is that a story that came originally, I guess, from a Japanese site called Mako Takara, which reported that Apple is close to releasing a new version of Logic Pro. That's that high-end professional audio editing program. That'll be called Logic Pro X and be available in the Mac App Store. And a lot of people are worried, and I also saw this on MacRumors, and a lot of people, have been concerned that it'll be sort of a dumbed-down version of Logic Pro, that they'll do what they did to Final Cut Pro to Logic Pro. But frankly, what I'm looking forward to is if Apple's going to drop the price on Logic Studio, because Logic, which is the high-end audio recording application, is very expensive. And we know that when Apple released Final Cut Pro in the Mac App Store, it really dropped the price. You can get Final Cut Pro, I think, for $300 now in the Mac App Store. And I suspect Apple is going to drop the price when it's good in the Mac App Store. And I really like the Mac App Store because there's several big advantages. One, they tend to drop the price of products that are in there. You don't have to worry about hunting down third-party upgrades, because any third-party app and any Apple app that's released through the Mac App Store is upgraded just by pressing a button, upgrade all apps that you've downloaded. And the other thing is you get 5 licenses, so that if you have 5 different computers and you log into Mac App Store with your common login, you can download the same software 5 different times and use it without paying any extra fees. So I think it's a big win for consumers. And, hopefully it'll be cheap when it comes out. So look for the release of Logic Pro pretty soon. It makes sense that it would be released soon, since the Final Cut program was upgraded and released in the Mac App Store. And eventually I think all of Apple's apps are going to be released in the Mac App Store. Now, a third-party app that I truly love and use all the time was released today in the Mac App Store, and that's 1Password. And 1Password's a great app, and usually it sells for, I think, close to $40 for the Mac. And now it's available for only $19.99. And it's a great app, and I was a little worried that Apple wasn't going to allow it in the Mac App Store, because Apple vets the apps that are in the Mac App Store. And when the Mac App Store came out, based on Apple's guidance, there was a concern that certain apps that go into sort of the guts of the operating system of the Mac, Apple may not allow, because Apple likes to sandbox the apps, which means the apps are contained and can't really sort of put code or do stuff that goes into the guts of the operating system. And that's a security concern, really, and also a quality concern, because programs in the past could sort of muck around with the guts of the operating system and add stuff, and then the unwitting consumer could screw up their operating system. And also that's a way for malware and other viruses and bugs to screw up your operating system. And so I was wondering if 1Password would ever be in the Mac App Store. And what 1Password has done is it's available in the Mac App Store, and they're offering it for 50% off. And it's a slightly higher version, 3.9, from the current version that's offered on the website of 3.8, I think, 1. And they're saying that if you buy it this 3.9 version for $19.99, you'll get a free upgrade to version 4 of 1Password, which is coming out soon. So it sounds like they want everyone to migrate to the Mac App Store, and that eventually the developers of 1Password will only offer it in the Mac App Store. That's my sense. So I'm going to go ahead and upgrade 1Password. Now, here's what it's actually the featured program, and it's doing really, really, really well. It's number 2 in top sales right now. So let's see what the website says. Basically, it's made by Agile Agile Solutions. But here's a short description. It says, with 1Password, you can use multiple logins for the same site. You can create multiple identities for filling into registration forms, surveys, and shopping carts. You can securely sync your data over the air between Macs, iPhones, iPads with Dropbox or locally over Wi-Fi. You can store other sensitive information in secure notes. You can save software licenses and receipts. You can organize everything with tags and folders. And I got to tell you, I've been using this for a couple of years, and I love it because, look, for websites, I've got all sorts of logins, right? And so what goes on with 1Password is there's a database. When you create a new login on a website, you can save it to the database. Your database for 1Password is encrypted, and you have a master password. So as long as you know the master password to 1Password, that's all you need to log into all these websites that you have different passwords. You don't have to remember the passwords that you created that are too hard to remember. You can create like a really complicated password, store it in 1Password, and then log in using just the easier password that you have for 1Password. Now, why would you do that? Isn't that the same vulnerability? And it's not, because what's going on is on 1Password, you're logging into 1Password on your computer, not on a website. And then 1Password on a website where it can be hacked is using the more complicated password. So the people on the internet can't get your easy 1Password password. They're only going to see the more complicated passwords that 1Password is putting into the website. And so it's a great way for having security on the web. And the other thing is it syncs seamlessly with 1Password app for the iPhone and the iPad, which costs not that much, and you can get on those on the iOS App Store. And they sync through Dropbox, because what you do is you save your Mac's version of 1Password's its database into Dropbox, and then you put Dropbox on your iPhone and your iPad, and you have your iPad and iPhone 1Password use that database, and then boom, like if I add in a password on my iPhone, it's on my Mac. If I add one on my Mac, it's on my iPhone and iPad. And it just works. It just works really well. Frankly, I'll tell you something. It works so well, Apple should consider buying 1Password. They should just buy them and incorporate this and give it away for free to anyone using an iPhone or an iPad. I wouldn't be surprised if Apple did that, because it just works so well. It's a great security tool, and it'd be very cool if Apple just bought it and gave it away for free. Okay, so what's right around the corner, and Forbes blog sort of agrees with me, is that the iPhone 5s are right around the corner. It's now, September 9th. Sometime at the end of September or early October, the iPhone 5 will come, and according to this blog from Forbes, not only will there be lots of iPhone 5s, but there'll be more carriers, because there's been stories in recent days that the iPhone 5 will be available on Sprint and T-Mobile, as well as Verizon and AT&T. And the article basically says that Apple is expected to ship up to 6 million iPhone 5 devices this month alone, and more than 20 worldwide by the end of the fourth quarter. So this is going to be a big launch. And frankly, once the iPhone is on Sprint and T-Mobile, I think it's going to have an impact on Android, because I do think a lot of people buy Android devices on Sprint and T-Mobile because they can't get the iPhone. So there's going to be a much more even playing field between the Android devices and the iPhone once the iPhone is on every carrier. So we'll have to see what happens. Now, one blog that I definitely disagree with is Business Insider, and this blog tries to be sensational and always seems to be, being negative about Apple. And it has an article out on September 8th entitled, "Yes, Microsoft did change the world more than Apple." And the writer Pascal Emmanuel Gorby makes arguments that, Microsoft was more of an impact than Apple. And it basically says Microsoft gave the world two things. Microsoft was the first real software company, and Microsoft did put a PC on every desk and in every home. And I think they're distorting things. Okay, what really put a PC on everybody's home was that IBM created the hardware of the PC, and then IBM made the mistake of not locking up the exclusive license of Microsoft's operating system. So this allowed Microsoft to then sell the operating system to competitors of IBM, which made clones of IBM's PC. IBM didn't intend for this to happen, and it was an accident of history. So, but think about it. Would we have PCs if Apple didn't come out with the Apple II long before the PC came out? I believe it was like in 1981 or 1980 that IBM released the PC, the personal computer, and it did so because Apple was the first real company that had wild commercial success with a personal computer with the Apple II, which came out after the Apple I. Now, there were these hobby kits for personal computers, but really the Apple II sales took off and eclipsed the competitors because Steve Wozniak, Apple's co-founder, figured out a way to put a disk drive to work with the Apple II. Up till then, no personal computer had disk drives. They were using tapes to load tapes into the system memory, and that was very, very time consuming. So look, in terms of pioneering the personal computer, we have to give that to Apple. And then think about the iPod. The iPod has been wildly successful and has really completely transformed the music industry. So I don't know. I don't think it's so clear that Microsoft is number one. I think Microsoft had huge financial success, but even Microsoft's operating system, Windows, is a clone of Apple's operating system for the Macintosh. So I disagree with Business Insider. I think Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak at Apple had more of an impact and changed the world because, everything is made possible by the innovations of Apple. Yes, Microsoft then, it sends that around and cheapens it, but the innovation really comes from Apple. Now, I want to make a point about how Apple operates its business and why you should trust it more than you should trust these other services or products that seem like good deals and because they're free or cheap. And the latest example is what Netflix is pulling. And here's a post that I wrote, which I'll read to you. I said, "Cheap services like Netflix are suspect. Netflix recently announced that you can only stream one movie or TV program at a time. If you want to stream more, you will have to pay double what you already pay for streaming. If you want to be able to stream Netflix to 3 accounts, then you would pay triple per month from what you pay. This change in policy comes shortly after Netflix changed its policy, allowing you to pay under $10 per month to get both DVDs sent to your home and streaming of movies and TV programs to your devices. Netflix earlier this summer changed its pricing to essentially double your monthly price if you want both DVDs and streaming of movies and shows. So the lesson here for consumers is that what appear to be great deals and cheap services like Netflix are suspect. For years, I crowed to friends about what a great deal Netflix is and what a great service it provides. For under $10 per month, I could get numerous DVDs per month to my home and have multiple streams of Netflix movies and TV shows running at the same time in my household. Now Netflix has raised the price for me and other consumers. Netflix is no longer a great deal. The lesson is that consumers herald what appear to be great services, but what consumers don't realize is that free and cheap services probably won't last forever and may come with strings attached. For example, consumers love Amazon because prices are low and shipping is cheap. Consumers love the Kindle because it is cheap and has unlimited data connection for free. But consumers neglect that Amazon, despite its vast revenue, only makes a small profit on all of its revenue. And Amazon relies on not having to collect sales taxes to have an edge on land-based businesses. It is very possible that in the future Amazon will raise prices. Similarly, if Google can't make big ad revenue from the Android operating system, maybe they will charge for it in the future. Same for Facebook. If it can't make revenue from ads and game sales, Facebook may charge for the service in the future. The point being, Netflix was cheap and now it's not so cheap. So don't believe the cheap or free ride will last forever. Personally, I am more comfortable with being a customer of Apple. Apple makes a hefty profit, but its products and services are still reasonably priced. I know that Apple can make a hefty living selling its products and services. As a result, I don't believe they will have financial pressure to raise prices. In fact, it's the reverse with Apple. Apple prices generally go down rather than abruptly being raised. Okay, so, I'm recording this on just 2 days before the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and I have vivid memories from 9/11 because actually I worked in one of the buildings that was destroyed in 9/11, and I actually wasn't at the building at the time it was destroyed because I was late for work that I think it was a Tuesday morning, and I remember it was a beautiful day, and back then, it was a very difficult time. People were very freaked out, and where I lived in the West Village of Manhattan, it was actually like a military zone. People couldn't go in and out. You had to go through checkpoints. And, I spent some time at home at that point, and I remember I had a computer back then, and it was a Power Mac G4. And if you're looking at the video version of this, I have the Wikipedia page to the Power Mac G4, and it really was a key friend. I mean, it was also, I think at the time that I got the first high-speed internet connection with cable, and it was also about the time that I founded Napster, and not many people remember this, but like shortly after 9/11, Apple released the iPod. So I was converting a lot of my CDs to MP3s back then with my Power G4. And to give you a sense of how much we've come along in 10 years, let's take a look at the specs of the Power Mac G4. Now this had the Power Mac chip was a chip that was, I guess, built by Motorola and IBM, and look at the speeds. I mean, I think I had like a 4 megahertz computer. I mean, now you have, I've got almost a 3 gigahertz computer. So that in terms of gigahertz power, it's 6 times faster. It had a PCI-based version, and for its time, it seemed pretty powerful. Now, it would be just very sort of wimpy compared to what we have. The memory, look at the memory. I mean, the memories came in 64 or 128 or 256 megabyte. Now you get, my iMac has 12 gigabytes of memory, and my MacBook Air has 4 gigabytes of memory. So I have something like, in my MacBook Air, I've got something like for 8 times more memory, and maybe 4 times 12, 48 times more memory in my iMac. So the storage back then, what was the storage? I think the storage was like, if you had 10 gigabytes of storage, that was considered a lot. I had, I think, 10 or 20 gigabytes, or maybe 30 gigabytes of storage. I think I had the Power Mac G4 gigabit Ethernet computer, and so that came with 20 gigabytes or 30 gigabytes or 40 gigabytes of storage. And now you can get, 2 terabytes. So the storage has gone way up. I mean, the storage in the Power Mac that I had 10 years ago is actually 1/3 the SSD drive storage that I have on this MacBook Air. And in terms of the 1 terabyte of storage that I have in the iMac, it's it's like 30 times smaller. So I have 30 times more memory. So it just really gives you a sense of where we've come in 10 years in terms of processor speed and in terms of power. But look, in those dark days, it was comforting to have this Macintosh. And months later, I think for Christmas, I got the first iPod. So, we've come a long way. So on this September 9th, on the eve of 9/11, there's a really good link post by John Gruber of Daring Fireball, who's a great blogger about Apple stuff, and he inspired me to blog myself. And he's got a post on Friday night called The New Apple Advantage, and he links to a post by Peter Bright. And basically, Peter Bright, according to John Gruber, wrote what he calls a good piece earlier this week on Ars Technica, which is another great website, in which Bright documents his attempt to buy a MacBook Air-like Windows laptop. In other words, the MacBook Air is a big hit, and this guy's looking for something like that on Windows. And he doesn't want to buy a MacBook Air and run Windows on it using Boot Camp. And he finds the experience of trying to buy a MacBook Air like Windows laptop confusing. There's too many models to choose from and expensive. And Gruber quotes some interesting passages from Bright on shopping from Dell. This is what Gruber says that Bright said. He said, quote, "It's even worse if you just browse without searching." This is looking on Dell Computer's website. "The options I get are just meaningless. Yes, I want everything computing, so I want an Inspiron. But hang on, I also want design and performance, so I want an XPS. Wait a second, I want thin and powerful too, so maybe I want a Z series. But the only line that apparently matches my broad search criteria, lightweight, 11 to 14 inches, I wouldn't even consider because I don't want a gaming laptop. And so I'm never going to click Alienware." And then Gruber also quotes, I guess, from Bright looking at HP, Hewlett-Packard. And Bright says, "The same odd labels cover everything. I know I don't want mini netbook. I want both everyday computing, that term again, and high performance because I don't want it to be slow, do I? And who knows what, quote, envy, end quote, means. When I tick my screen size and weight boxes, I get back a crop of lousy netbooks that are almost the complete opposite of what I want. And then he goes on to Lenovo's site, and Bright says, quote, "It starts off with the same stupid classification that must make sense to some guy in marketing, quote, powered for productivity, end quote, and quote, optimized for entertainment, end quote, and quote, no nonsense features, but for versatility, end quote." So I guess what Bright is saying and what Gruber is saying, that these other companies' websites are just way too confusing. There's too many choices, and they use this sort of weird language that really doesn't tell you what you want. Actually, the beauty of Apple is that the website's very simple. There's not a lot of choices. I mean, let's go to the Apple store here, and there's not a lot of choices, right? You go to the store, click, and okay, you've got MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, Mac Mini, iMac, Mac Pro. But just from looking at the pictures, it's very, very easy to tell what they are. The MacBook Air is the thin, light model. The MacBook Pro is the more traditional laptop. And then the Mac Mini has no monitor, no keyboard. It's just a cheap standalone computer with no parts. And then, of course, the iMac is easy because the iMac is the integrated computer with like everything. And then the Mac Pro is essentially like the Mac Mini, but really for professionals, with multiple bays and many things to put in it and very powerful processors. So it is much easier, and so Gruber does make a very valid point, and so does this Mr. Bright character. He also quotes from Bright's analysis regarding why the top PC makers seemingly, if not outright admittedly, can't compete with MacBook Air. And he thinks that Bright's analysis is good. This is Gruber. And this is what Bright says. The problem is that the PC industry, particularly the large OEMs, just aren't set up to produce this kind of machine. The PC industry is built around an idea of almost infinite variation, different Wi-Fi adapters, different Ethernet chipsets, different GPUs, different USB 3 controllers. This variety is then reflected in the systems available from manufacturers, and more importantly, it's reflected in the way the systems are actually built. So, yeah, I guess the problem is there's too many choices. It's confusing. Nobody knows really what they want. And then, Gruber points out that the iPad has very simple choices, white or black, GSM, CDMA, Wi-Fi only, 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, 24 gigabytes of storage. And that's true. If you have too many choices, it makes it confusing, and people don't know what they want. So, anyways, Gruber basically attributes this Apple success. If he has this interesting line. He says, "So let's be lazy for a second here and attribute all of Apple's success over the past 15 years to two men, Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. We'll give Jobs the credit for the adjectives beautiful, elegant, innovative, and fun. We'll give Cook the credit for the adjectives affordable, reliable, available, and profitable. Jobs designs them, Cook makes them and sells them." Interesting analysis by Gruber. It could be, because if you think about it, in recent years, Apple computers have become very affordable, and Apple's been able to scale up. Now, Steve Jobs has always been making beautiful stuff. The real challenge for him has been to be profitable and cheap. So, I don't know. Very good analysis. Anyways, check it out. I'll have a link to it. It's called The New Apple Advantage, and it's on Daring Fireball website. Finally, a little service reminder. As Cult of Mac pointed out, and as other websites have pointed out, Apple on the 9th of September has released a very important security update. And basically, you should get it. You could just go to Update under the Apple little figure you have up on the left side of your computer and download it, because basically it deals with this attack on the internet involving Digitar and Notar issuing compromised security certificates to websites after being hacked, including one for Gmail. So it fixes that at the root level, and it's available for Lion, for Snow Leopard, and just hit software update and download directly from there. So that's the security tip, so check it out. Okay, thanks for listening to episode 88 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex. Thanks for listening. If you want an invite to Google+, just email me at maxfuture@gmail.com. Again, this is a chit-chat-free podcast, all Apple talk. No rat holes to go down to talking about things like movies or, I don't know, my dry cleaning or anything like that. This is only about Apple. I'd appreciate any positive feedback either on YouTube or on Blip TV or in the iTunes store where you can get the various podcasts that I make, the iPad podcast, the Apple podcast. So thanks for listening.
This has been a Max Future production.